So, there Granny was, alone in this big house in the suburbs, many miles from her children. There were friends and neighbors, of course, but they had their lives too. Granny was restless, but she didn't know what to do about it. One day, out of sheer boredom, Granny hopped in the car and began driving. She wasn't going anywhere in particular, just driving. Eventually, she found herself traveling on the newly built bypass that circled around the city. Granny thought somehow it seemed appropriate that she was driving in circles. So there Granny was, driving on automatic with random thoughts rattling in her head. But Granny only got about a quarter way around the loop when something triggered her attention. Granny wasn't sure what it was, but she made a turn at the next exit and went back to see. When Granny got back to the general area, she thought she had seen something. There wasn't much to see. Well, there was a newly built strip mall with the usual stores, but Granny didn't think that was what might have caught her attention. So she found the next exit and began driving back the same way she came. There, right as she entered the highway, she saw it. Granny wasn't sure why the place caught her attention, but she was determined to find out why. Granny took the same exit she took before, except this time she turned onto the side road that led back to the place. Spread across on a large paved lot was a sea of trailers and motorhomes. There were so many that Granny was overwhelmed at the sight. As if in a trance, Granny pulled in and found a parking spot. But Granny just sat there. She didn't understand why she was there. No recent thought crossed her mind. While Granny sat there thinking or waiting for a thought, a rapping on the car window disrupted her spell. It was the salesman. He was a bit older, a bit well seasoned in sales, thought Granny. "Can I help you?" he asked. Granny rolled down the window. "I'm not sure," said Granny. "There's just so many of these things here." The salesman grinned. "We have a huge selection, and I'm sure you'll find something to your liking." Granny wasn't going to just sit there in her car, so she decided it would be best to just look around. The salesman directed her to the front lot with the big motorhomes and showed her several models. They all looked very elegant and big, maybe too big. The salesman was very insistent on praising the features and painting a pretty picture of life in a motorhome. Even when Granny told the salesman that her husband had died and she only needed room for herself, he found excuses as to why she should buy the bigger motorhome. Granny was a very practical person, and she was waving away every motorhome the salesman showed her. The breathtaking price tags were also helpful encouragement to do so. The salesman finally concluded that Granny was just not going to buy, so he politely excused himself as they reached the office. Granny never saw him again. But Granny was not yet ready to walk back to her car. Being there still nagged at the back of her mind, so Granny decided to do her own tour. Her first stop was towards the back of the lot. Granny figured that was where the better priced items would be, having only been shown the big motorhomes at the front lot. Granny found herself surrounded by some small trailers, some so small she thought they were built for children. Then Granny walked into one of the larger trailers and was surprised by a youngish man sitting on a couch reading a brochure. Granny figured he was someone looking around like she was, but after some casual conversation about the trailer, she discovered the young man was actually a recent hired salesman who was still learning about the stock. The young salesman said he was still in training and wasn't yet authorized to sell the trailers, but offered to help if he could. This young salesman didn't have the practiced routine of the older salesman, so Granny thought there would be no harm in talking to him. To Granny's pleasure, the young salesman asked her what she had in mind, instead of telling her what she needed. Granny wasn't sure what she wanted or was looking for. The young salesman reminded her of her kids, and she began telling him of her loss and how the RV store had caught her attention for no known reason. It was then that the salesman suggested that maybe Granny was just looking for a reason to get out of the house and tour the nation, to see something more than her familiar surroundings. That was it, thought Granny, so verbally she said, yes. Granny and the young salesman must have sat there in that trailer for an hour talking about travel. The young salesman had mentioned that he had done some traveling after graduating high school, though not in anything as fancy as what the RV store had to offer. It was just him and an old station wagon. But he had found some locations that were free. Eventually, the conversation came around to what kind of RV might be best. It was clear Granny's car would never pull one of those Dicer trailers. The young salesman suggested that a motorhome might be better. Remembering her experience, Granny said, I've already been through those motorhomes in front. No, thank you. What about a Class C motorhome in the next lot over? The salesman inquired. Class C? What's that? Granny was baffled. Were there different types of motorhomes? They walked over to the other lot, and Granny saw a row of smaller motorhomes with an odd structure over the driver's area. The young salesman explained that that was the sleeping area. Granny looked over a few, saw the price tag, and understood why the older salesman didn't show her these vehicles. They were about half the price. Some were short and some were long, and each one had a different arrangement inside, but they all had an appeal that larger motorhomes and trailers didn't. They were cozy instead of flashy. Granny decided right then and there, this is what she was looking for. All she had to do was pick the size and design. And she did, after dragging the young salesman with her through all the motorhomes. I'll take this one, Granny said. As I mentioned, I'm not allowed to sell to customers yet. Maybe I... Nonsense, says Granny. You helped me decide, so you deserve the commission. Granny walked briskly back to the office with the young salesman in tow. How Granny managed to still have that much energy to walk briskly remains a mystery. The poor young salesman was out of breath by the time they reached the office. Granny, being no nonsense, promptly made it clear which motorhome she will buy and to whom the commission will be given. The young salesman had no say in it. The deal was done, and the motorhome was delivered in Granny's driveway. And the motorhome she chose took up most of the driveway, a problem Granny needed to solve. But there was time for that later.